Oh, okay. Yeah, I've heard of some weather. I mean, it's we have the same weather 11 months out of the year here. It's
Yeah.
a blend of nothingness, but I hope everyone's safe and happy.
Oh yeah, yeah. My brother lives in Birmingham, and they had a bad storm up there today.
I saw that and they're expecting more tonight in
It's
the
awful.
darkness.
Ugh.
Crazy. So scary, man. I mean, we get earthquakes and every 20 years and they're devastating, but it's not like a seasonal thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
No?
At least we know when
That's
when it's gonna happen. We have a window. We're like, all right, here's
yeah.
when this stuff could happen. But you guys just like all of a sudden everything just starts breaking apart, and you're like, huh? All right, there's an earthquake.
Yeah, the only thing good about the quakes are the gangsters that are like scary as hell and the Beverly Hills fashionistas were all equal at that time,
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
uh,
it's the huge equalizer.
Well, here's what we do for the show. It's just going to be like a conversational type of thing. We'll ask you some questions. You can talk about whatever you really want to talk about, and there's no filters, so you can curse all that good stuff. And I'll start a countdown, and we are live to Twitch right now. I'll do a
Great.
countdown. Jacob will do
How do
our.
I look? I look and sound okay?
Oh yeah, you look great.
Yeah.
Sound perfect. And
Perfect.
Jacob will do our ad read at the beginning. I have a little song that come our music, and then I'll come in and introduce you. And I'm
Sounds good.
excited.
Get into it. I'm having a good time already.
Awesome. Here we go. Jacob, you ready?
Yep.
All right. 3, 2, 1, go.
Aquarius Productions specializes in photography, videography, sound, and entertainment. Comedy reels, headshots, music videos. Hell, Patty will even write you a dope ass ad read if that's what you need. They know what it's like to have a vision. Aquarius is here to help you realize it. And if you aren't an entertainer and you just want a special occasion immortalized on film, they got you. Or if you are a venue owner looking to entertain your guests, they are here to produce comedy and music events for you. Contact their Facebook or Instagram page for details. Aquaries, content created by artists for artists. And as always, thank you to our Patreon supporter, Mr. Frank Kinnemer, and let's start the show. Here's our phantom music.
Yeah, that's nice. That's deep, very deep.
Ooh, you know what that music means? It means it is Thursday night, and it is time for the Open Micers podcast. My name is Jason Robbins.
I'm the Pillsbury Doughboy of podcasts, Jacob Craig. And
Oh,
boy,
my
am I
God.
excited for our guest tonight. Do you want to introduce him, Jason?
Yes,
You don't
I
get
do.
You
Now-
don't get to do a lot of introductions.
In the 7 years of doing podcast, well, actually longer, probably like 8 or 9 years of doing a podcast, I've talked to some cool people. I've talked to comic book artists. I've talked to actors, musicians. We talked to one of my heroes, Leland Sklar, a few weeks ago. Nothing like tonight, dude. Tonight is this guy here is one of my favorite drummers of all time, and I can put on one hand my favorite drummers. Of course you got Alex Van Halen. You
Yeah.
got you got Alex Van Halen. You got Neil Peart. You got let's see who else is up there.
John Bonham, bro.
John Bonham's up there. Who else? Well, this guy is in the top 5. This guy right here, because when I started playing drums in 1991, there was a little album out called Ritual de lo Habitual that I listened to pretty much on repeat since then for the last 30 years. And this guy is the drummer for Jane's Addiction, Porno for Pyros, Hellride, Mr. Oh, here he comes, Mr. Stephen Perkins, everybody.
Yeah. Hey, well, thank you for that introduction. First of all, drummers, to me, the ones you mentioned and my favorites, all have a personality behind the drum kit.
Mhm.
And you can hear who and what they're like by their playing. And it's not about technique, even though they all have it. And it's not always about speed or showing off, which they all did. It's really about putting this personality into the music. And I always think about the Police. I mean, Sting wrote great songs, but without
Yeah.
Stuart Copeland, there's no urgency, there's no emergency, there's no reason.
Oh yeah.
And it's just lyrics and chord changes. But you put Stu in there, and you've got some kind of hurricane, and that's because of the drummer. And a lot of great drummers I never got to meet because they passed on, but I get to know them through their drumming. And that's really a great honor to be on your list. And, God bless Alex Van Halen, because growing up with one of the greatest guitar players of all time, his younger brother, it must have been tough to like do what I was saying, put your personality in the
Mm-hmm.
music. But they were some of my favorite bands have brothers. We're talking about Pantera,
Mm-hmm.
The King, Oasis, Van Halen, and there's brotherly love and a
Mm-hmm.
hate thing, but there's something great about that drummer guitar player brother, and that's what Pantera had, and I was a huge Dimebag, and of course, when Dimebag was taken from us, I just can't imagine how his other half, Vinny, went on, and now Vinny's passed on too, but
I can't even
it is
imagine what that must have been like to watch your brother die on stage. I mean, that's just
uh,
that
too
never
much.
happens. That's like a once in a million years thing. And
And it should never happen again. But I was deep into heavy metal. I'm 53, and when you were talking 91, when James was doing Ritual, etc. I right after that I joined Infectious Grooves,
mm-hmm.
and that brought me back into metal. And we started touring with Ozzy and Pantera, and we did shows with Soulfly, and we really were surrounded by metal. And I really love the metal drummer, and the the sensibilities they have, and the technique. If you're talking about Iron Maiden and Slayer, and if you want to put like Judas Priest and some of the earlier metal bands, Saxon, the drummer always had some real muscle
Mm-hmm.
and punch. And I love that. I love swinging drummers, because Black Sabbath with Bill Ward, he was a swinging drummer.
Yeah.
But the music was the beginning of metal with Sabbath. But the drums, and almost like what Mitch Mitchell did with Jimi Hendrix, there was this swing into it,
Mm-hmm.
and it was aggressive, and it was punchy, but it was always danceable in a way.
Yeah, that was
But
one thing that caught me when I first, I grew up with a dad who was a musician and was really into like 60s, music like the Beatles, Rolling Stones, of course, Jimi Hendrix. And the one drummer that really caught my attention was, of course, Mitch Mitchell, because nobody else played like that guy. Nobody sounded like him. And it was just, like you said, there was a swing, there was like a swagger to it. And
absolutely.
when you
And
hear it,
the conversation that Mitch had with Jimmy, to me, can be compared to Elvin Jones and John Coltrane. It was these two guys talking, arguing, listening, screaming at each other, and it was all put on the tape, and we could listen to
yeah.
it and enjoy it over and over. And and the drums are such a unique instrument, because every other instrument can kind of paint a stroke of music. A drummer has to pierce the silence. It's like hitting a nail in a wall. And when you do it right and it goes in with your first strike, it feels good.
Yeah.
And if you have to pull it back out and put the hole somewhere else because you were too high, too low, it's depressing. But it's doing it right the first time. And the drummer can go into a room that's silent, and he has to be so, in a sense, sure of himself,
Mm-hmm.
to pierce the silence with these punches of kick, snare, and hat, and tom fills. And yeah, we can use brushes and mallets, but most of rock and roll was about punching the
Of
space
course.
and leaving a mark, and jazz music also was this great conversation. And then Motown, the drummer was more of a clock. He didn't converse much with the
Mm-hmm.
other members. And then you had rock and roll, and that did it both. There was conversation, and of course the pocket and the clock. And if you think about the Stones and the Beatles and the Animals and some of the earlier bands, they did Motown songs in their set,
Mm-hmm.
but they grew from there, and they took the blues, and they took Little Richard, and Jerry Lee Lewis, and of course the great Chuck Berry that started it. And they really had this. It was fun,
Well,
but it was also. Go ahead.
that was how Van Halen got their sound too, because they when they were just a party rock band in
Yeah.
Southern California before they were signed, they were doing like Ohio Players and like old Motown songs, and that's kind of how they got their that kind of it's rock, but it's danceable at the same time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you think about, the first two records especially, you can really swing dance to
Mm-hmm.
those songs.
Yeah.
You know, you almost couples dance to
Oh
like Van
yeah.
Halen. And you know, I always thought a great band was awesome with headphones, but then when you go see them, what happens? And that takes you to the next level.
Oh
And
yeah.
Van Halen went in the Who and Zeppelin, and you know some of the great live bands. Of course, when you talk about Rush, the Precision.
Yeah.
You talk about Emerson, Lake and Palmer or Genesis. There was Precision, but there was just great light shows and lasers. But then you know, then other bands didn't need that or use it. They had their frenetic energy like the Who,
Yeah.
and and later on, I you know, I love Kiss because of not only the show they put on in the theater, because they were not incredible musicians, but they did incredible songs. And they were a unit. They sounded like a unit, and it's just cool to listen to rock and roll and jazz and where music's going today, where people spend time alone on a laptop and produce a whole record without a band there. You know, better for worse, it happens, and there's something to learn from that, you know. And I always like to put on records as a kid and play to them records I loved.
Mm-hmm.
And as I got older, I started buying records I didn't love and try to play to those and see what happened to my playing. You know, maybe it take me somewhere that I wasn't really sure I wanted to go, but it was good for me. You know, it was
No,
good
it's
for
the
my play.
same. I did the same thing. You know, I first got my drum. That's how I learned how to play drums. Was this was back in the days when we still had the big, you know, the big family, you know, stereo in the living room.
Yeah,
So I
it was
would
a
just,
it was a TV, a
yeah.
record player, everything. Right?
So I would just put the drums right next to the stereo and just crank it and play along with it. And of course, Van Halen was like, you know, the all those records, like just putting them one after another, and just trying to learn how to play and play in time, and you know, do all
Absolutely.
that kind of stuff. And now, and another thing I wanted to ask you about that you kind of touched on a little bit, that drums are an instrument that are, it's very hard to kind of have your own sound. Like for somebody
Mhm.
to be able, like you can listen to, you know, Alex Van Halen and you hear that snare and you know it's him. You listen
Yeah,
to Neil Peart and you hear him, even though he's had different sets and tunings over the years, you still know it's him. You're one of those drummers too that, you know, especially like when, you know, Nothing Shocking came out, and then, you know, Ritual came out. At that time, you guys came out at a time where, you know, the big metal bands and stuff and the rock bands, like the drummers were, you know, the big, you know, cannon drums at the time. And then here
yeah,
you came
yeah.
along with like, you know, the little almost like a jazz setup with the real tight sounding drums and the tight sounding snare and all the Latin percussion. And when I heard that, it was just like, you can do that? Like, it was so different. And
Well,
even to
there
even to
was
this day, like you sound like you. Like you hear
oh,
you play and you know it's you.
well, there was something great that happened in the '80s, but Tommy Lee was the peak of it.
Oh yeah.
And then, but you know, and it was meat and potatoes. And I was young enough to go see Motley night after night at the Whiskey, at the Roxy, at the Troubadour, a place called Perkins Palace, actually down in Pasadena. And I used to just watch Tommy and also the great late Frankie Bonelli. And these guys were the meat and potatoes. And a lot of drummers had to follow that, and they became a replica. But Jane's Addiction came out in '86, and our scene wasn't the Sunset Strip. It was late night, after hours, downtown LA.
Mm-hmm.
And we were surrounded by Fishbone and the Chili Peppers and Minutemen and X, but also the cats from Motley and Rat and Faster Pussycat and LA Guns. They needed somewhere to go after hours, after the strip ended.
Uh-huh.
They were there as well. So there was this great melting pot of musicians. And me and Navarro were only 17. Most of the cats I just mentioned were already early 20s. So me and Dave were still wanted to have big fireworks and events in our playing. And we brought that kind of stimuli to the scene. And if you listen to the very first Jane's Addiction music with Idiot's Rule, Pigs and Zen, Had a Dad,
Mm-hmm.
there was this funkified that was influenced by the Chili's and Fishbone and the Minutemen and Firehose. But then we started to grow into 3 days, and then she did, and Ted just admitted it. We started to gather up our own darker sound. But there was something very funky about the scene. And I was in marching band, and that had many different drummers, like 5 different bass drummers, 10 snare guys, and people on little tri-toms and quintoms. And so I had all these percussive influences, and I did love gathering, in a sense, LA is right next to Mexico. So you had this incredible Latin sound always happening around you. And I loved reggae and ska music, like the Specials and the Police and other bands. And I would let that kind of come into my sound and present that to Jane's Addiction. And then I found a guy named Babatunde Alatunji, and he was an African drummer. And basically he would surround himself with like 10 other guys on hand drums. And I always thought, cool, I love Phil Rudd from AC/DC, but what happens if Babatunji was in AC/DC? And I also thought that about Fela Kuti. He would bring these African pop rhythm beats, and of course Sly Stone and the Meters, and I let that all come into my playing, and I never ignored it, and I brought it to the table. And if you listen to Ritual, you got No One's Leaving, Ain't No Right, Obvious, and these are very, in a sense, if you put them on a djembe, they're African rhythms played on a drum set surrounded by rock and roll elements. And I was fortunate because I had band members that were just as courageous as I was. Let's change things. And if Summertime Rolls could be right next to Mountain Song, and Jane Says could be next to Pigs and Zen, each song had its own planet, its own galaxy, its own universe. We never try to repeat ourselves and get like a formula. We just wanted to make each song. And Perry wrote these poems. He didn't write lyrics. He didn't say the verse goes 3 times, the chorus goes twice, then we do a bridge. He's like, here's a couple words about a girl. The next few lines are about the fight. And the final, verse is about us breaking up. Let's write a song about this poem. And then we had to
fit the thing too. You go back and listen to those albums and those songs, and they're the structure of those songs. Like you said, there's not really like a verse, chorus, verse, bridge back to verse. It's I never really noticed that till now. It's like it's more just like poem songs, and
they are. If you think about Stop, it's 3 verses, a guitar solo, and then the vocal a cappella, and then we're done. We never hit a chorus.
Yeah.
Here we go, and it's just, it was a poem about the environment and the world actually beating itself up. Everybody hurting the world, hurting the earth. And his lyrics are so relevant today. No One's Leaving is about racism. Stop is about waking up and taking care of the environment. And they weren't hidden, but they were poems. You had to read them, to understand what they're saying. And I think the brilliance about Jane's went right into Porno. And when we did Porno, me and Perry decided we're not going to find another Navarro. Let's not try to. Let's find a guitar player that likes to write songs on acoustic guitar. And we started writing songs around a campfire with bongos, acoustic guitar, and smoke a little, drink a little, loosen up, take that into the studio. And that's why those songs, to me, are so, in a sense, island ready. They're ready to surf to, And the bass player, Martijn, he was from Amsterdam, born in Holland. So I couldn't reference Electric Funeral by Black Sabbath, or I couldn't reference Wrathchild by Iron Maiden. He would scratch his head. I don't know what you're talking about, Perkins. And so the rhythm section, he grew up with different type of music. He didn't have FM radio. He didn't have what I grew up with. So that made a brand new, fresh rhythm section. Very interesting bass lines.
Oh, yeah.
Latin. And so
I want to ask you about that, especially the beat for Pets.
Oh, great. Yeah.
What made you just say, okay, I'm just gonna ride the timbali throughout the whole song? Like,
great
I would have
question.
never thought about that in a million years. And I'll let Jacob jump in here too, because I'm dominating the conversation. I'm sorry,
okay.
Jacob.
I'm not gonna take it away from you, brother.
Okay, well, let me tell you how that came about. We were feeding my pet snake. His name was Bobo. And me and Perry were sitting there, and I popped a little tiny mouse in there, and it was awful. And I can't do that anymore. But at the time, I was into it. And Perry looked at me and he goes, when the aliens come, not if, but when, we'll make we'll make great pets. We'll be like your snake. We'll be like your snake waiting to be fed if they drop a little something into our cage. And we're, thank you, sir. We'll give you some more food in 3 days. Mm-hmm. So I thought, I'm going to write a drum beat that sounded like a clock ticking. And the clock is basically inspired by the poem about when the aliens come. And I wanted to be that clock. Tick, tock, tick, tock. So I looked at my drum beat, my drum set, and I got a 10-inch timbali, a 12-inch snare, and a 20-inch kick. And these were definitely different sounds for a rock and roll drum set. And I tried to become this clock and not ever vary from it, and no drum fills, just be this pulse. And it didn't have anything to do with the bass line or the guitar riff. It was all based upon the poem. And that's how the drum beat was planted in my head. And by that time, I was good about thinking forward about the mix. What's it going to sound like when we mix? Where's the bongo or the timbali going to fit in the mix? Bottom left. Where's the hi-hat going to go? Top right. I never thought that way as a kid, but as a young adult, I started thinking about placing drums and sounds and thinking about the final product. And it was really this picture we were painting. And I'm very proud of that beat because a lot of that record is quite, in a sense, busy with the drum patterns. And that one is really simple. But it was born and spawned of this lyric of aliens coming in and making us pets. And I miss Bobo the snake. Hopefully he's still around. But I after Bobo was eating mice, he had to go to tiny rabbits. And I'm like, okay, I gotta give the snake away. I cannot do this. This is not. Yeah. I'm not a snake guy, but
But I love Porno for Pyros, and I love that album when it dropped in, and it was just that one song, it was so different, and just listening to this day, I still listen to that song, and every time I hear it, I'm like, what was he thinking when he did that? And finally, I get to ask you the question, what you were thinking when you wrote that. It's awesome. My day is made.
And it's cool to have a lyricist in a band that's got content and relevant words. And I always heard Ringo say, you play for the song and you have to read the lyrics to understand what the song's about. And as a kid, I was like, what is he talking about? You play for the song and you read the lyrics to write a drum beat. But it all started to kind of get into my writing pattern. And I wanted to know what the bass line was, what the guitar riff was. Yes. What's the lyrics? And also the phrasing of the words, the way he pronounces the syllables and where he pushes and pulls, kind of like John Densmore with the Doors, always kind of listening to Morrison and kind of making it part of the drum part to fit these unusual Morrison poems. That's really a wonderful, collaboration of musicians when you get the right guys and everyone's listening to each other. Nowadays, it's not bad or good, but a lot of people will have me do sessions even before I hear the song. And they just like, can you give me a beat at, 120 beats per minute? And for the second verse, can you make a variation of the first verse? And then for the bridge, can you go tribal? And I'd like to try everything, even if I don't have lyrics. But then when you hear the song, you go, oh, I didn't know he was singing about that. I would have changed my drum beat if I knew what the damn song was about, know? Not that it would have been better or worse, but it would have been different.
Yeah. You want to jump in here, Jacob? I've been hogging the conversation.
Yeah, Jake.
That's all right.
I want to hear what
I know you've been drumming longer than I've been alive, so I'm not gonna,
Both of us have.
Yeah, for sure.
So Jake, how old are you?
I'm 21. I just turned 21.
Oh, that's brilliant. Now, my son's 11, and I like to talk to him about how he sees the world. Of course, the last 12 months, everyone has got a new perspective, but how he sees the future and how he sees and hears music and the quality of art and novels and film and books. And I think it's important as a musician to hang out with every age. Now, as an athlete, when you're 53, that's my age, some athletes have to hang up their cleats and their bats and their mitts because they can't do it physically. But a musician can go until the day he pops. And, I think you just get better. Drums, of course, are athletic. You have to have stamina and endurance. And I take that serious. I like to feed my body quality food and water and vitamins and supplements. So when I get on the drum kit, I can achieve what my brain wants me to do. But as a 21-year-old, you don't have to face those physical issues yet. You just be and are a young, growing, soul. As a 53-year-old, I look back at my days in the 20s, and my God, I celebrated my 21st birthday on a Jane's Addiction stage, and
Wow.
I thought I knew everything,
Right.
but I didn't know shit.
Well, Jacob thinks he knows everything too. So.
Yeah, I also think I know everything. I spent my 21st birthday getting drunk on this show like 3 weeks ago. It was the best thing I could have done. But I do have a question.
Yeah, what do you got?
If I'm not mistaken, which I often am, if history serves me correctly, you're in the band Hellride, which is actually a Stooges cover band.
Correct.
So I was wondering where your love of Iggy Pop came from.
Well, Iggy started as a drummer, and that always turned me on to know that. The story of Iggy and his band and MC5 and the power of Detroit was always fascinating to me, because you leave your blood and your guts and your sweat on the stage, or they dismiss you. And that's what goes down in Detroit. It's a working man's city, and the musicians that come out of there are hardworking, and they're solid, and they really care about leaving it there for the audience. It's like one of the great, boxers or athletes that go back to the hotel and just collapse, because they did everything for the show or the game. But Iggy's lyrics, so little words per song, but so meaningful. His actual, like I was saying about Perry, the delivery of where he delivers the syllables and how he places the words are somewhat percussive. And now I can tell, because he's a drummer, that he had these percussive type of his approach of dropping the words and then getting out of the way. And also his dedication to being the courageous, brave, and ever-changing, like Stevie Wonder or Prince. Each record grew from something. It didn't sound like the last record. And Funhouse wasn't like the first Stooges record. And Raw Power wasn't like Funhouse. And Lust for Life was completely new. And Passenger is a beautiful song you would never find on a Stooges record. And I always loved Candy that he did with the B-52s girl. And it was like, this is how Iggy grows. And David Bowie, producing his record and going on tour with him as a keyboardist, and then Bowie tipping his hat and doing China Girl and doing such a great version, but it's an Iggy song about his wife. And, Iggy doesn't give up, and he's ever changing, and his style of clothes and hair changes, and his records change. And great story, 1989, 1988, I got to a party in downtown LA, and I was looking for the basically anything I can roll a joint with. And they said, "Oh, there's someone in the next room. He's got papers." I walked in. I heard Jane's Addiction, Pigs and Zen playing. I look at this guy. I said, "You got some papers?" He looks at me. It was Iggy. He goes, "Hey, man, I got papers." So we rolled one up, and after we puffed, I said, "By the way, I'm the drummer for the band we're listening to." And he goes, "I fucking love you guys." 2 weeks later, Jane's Addiction was opening for Iggy for 2 months.
Nice.
On a record called Brick for Brick. And I met him at a party, smoked with him, and then all of a sudden I'm on tour with the guy. And he had this great band, the keyboardist from Madness, the guitar player for Hanoi Rocks, the drummer from Psychedelic Furs. I don't know where the bass player came from, somewhere cool. So he had this eclectic band, and he had this great record. And, I got to hand it to Mark Geiger, our agent. He had us on that tour for 2 months in front of all the punks. And then after that tour, he put us on a tour with Love and Rockets in front of all the gothic music lovers. And then he got us on a show with Peter Murphy, and then the Psychedelic Furs. And then, all these bands that we played with was this perfect, I guess, in a sense, audience for us to gather. If you went to someone's house and they had a Cure poster and a Metallica poster, that was a Jane's fan. We can gather both sides of the spectrum. And so Iggy was always and still is just this great, powerful source of creativity. And touring with them was a reminder every night. What I was saying earlier, you do it and you leave it for the audience. You give it to them, and you limp off the stage and crawl into a bed, and but you do it again the next day. And
It's
then
not rock
Mike
and roll
Watt,
unless you're bleeding.
exactly. I mean, it's so Detroit. And Mike Watt, the bass player for Hellride, was in the Stooges for about 5 years, and so it was an honor to play with Mike. And I met Mike in '86, but for Mike to know the real Iggy because he toured with him, and then for us to do an Iggy cover band, and we kind of take a verse and a chorus, and then we jam for like 10 minutes on the riff. So we kind of add this Coltrane Grateful Dead experience. That's what Hellride is. And we usually do the first two records. We'll dabble a little bit with Lust for Life and a little bit for the Raw Power. And as his career went on, we would pick and choose a song or two, but it's basically the Stooges covers. But I love what Detroit gives rock and roll. And if you gotta say, hey, Bob Seger, Ted Nugent. I mean, a couple of the guys that came out of there are so random, but MC5 and the Stooges, and Alice Cooper too, man. I mean, the Coop.
You're talking about Mike Watt, and just next time you see him, tell him that me and one of my old bass players, who I'm still friends with to this day, is a guy I grew up with my entire life. We were big Firehose fans, and of course the Minutemen and stuff. But we were watching, and I think it was the Late Show, and Firehose was on, and they were playing Big Train. And they come out, and Mike Watt's playing, and like the first 5 seconds of the song, he's rocking out so hard. He busts his low E with his fingers. And we're just like, holy crap. He like completely just broke that top string with his fingers. Like, that dude's amazing. And
he's a real force.
You can probably still find it on YouTube somewhere.
Oh, absolutely. That's what's great about there's so many, positives and, pros and cons to social media. But the pros is you can find so much cool footage.
Oh, yeah.
And it's always there, and you can rewatch it and share it with your friends and daughters and sons and show them what it used to be like.
Yeah.
Great footage of Fear playing Saturday Night Live when John Belushi had, he forced the issue. Yeah. We got to have, and instead of having just 60 SNL audience members, Fear brought in a bunch of LA freaks and they destroyed the place. And it's great, great viewing pleasure. But the thing is with LA punk, and I had this conversation with Watt, Black Flag and the Minutemen bought a van together, and they were the first punk rock band to leave their hometown and go take it around the country. And most punk rock in America would just be a local band and never do anything. And these guys just said, let's take it to Jersey. Let's take it to Miami. Let's take it to Chicago. Let's get in a van. And I love that about, the stories I get from Watt about the Circle Jerks and Flag and Fear and, even what the Cramps and the Germs were doing. It was just incredibly new and fresh and dangerous. And they took it out of LA and they brought it around the country. It was just so cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool documentaries on YouTube that I've actually been watching lately. I watched one the other day about the rise of Black Flag and Minor Threat and all those bands back in the the early to mid '80s, bringing the punk rock scene into the mainstream, and it was a great documentary. And it's just interesting to go back and watch that stuff. But Stephen, we're actually coming up.
Something about. I was going to say, people talk about punk rock. You didn't have to play good. I don't believe.
No,
they're disciplined, great musicians. Mm-hmm. With the Minutemen, it's nearly jazz. I mean, it really was. It was punk rock jazz.
Yes.
But you can't just call in a punk rock thing. You got to be great. And Bad Brains to me is like the top quality. The mixture of reggae and Jamaican influence with that heavy rock and that punk rock attitude with HR and vocals. It doesn't get more intense than that. It really doesn't.
Well, Stephen, we are coming up to the end of our Zoom call, and I just want to say tonight has been an absolute pleasure. And I hope we get to talk to you again, because I definitely want to get you back on the show, and hopefully we'll have some more time. And, you know, I could ask you a billion questions. And
Wow, thank you, man. Absolutely. We'll do part 2.
yes.
And I'm there for you. And I'm wishing everybody a great year, a great springtime. Stay healthy, happy, safe. And don't forget to cause trouble, too. I mean, it's important.
One of these days, I'm gonna jam with you. We're gonna put 2 drum sets together, and we're gonna jam out together somehow. We're gonna do it.
I'll endorse that 100%, man. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, Jacob. Was there anything you want to tell everybody where they can find you online, and anything, any new music you got out there you want to press?
Well, sure. Why not? You know, I got a new band actually. It's called Jane's Addiction, and we're doing some stuff. We are actually doing something. We have been talking about, you know, new music and putting shows together as soon as restrictions lift. Let's get back out there on stage and blow things up. But I do, you know, you can find me, Stephen Perkins Drummer, on Instagram, at Stephen Perkins for Twitter. I'm always posting some really positive and great old footage of the bands. And I got a band called Think Floyd, or Think EXP, where we do Pink Floyd music, and then we get muscle, we get muscular with it. I've got Hellride. I've got a band with the bass player from The Strokes called Summer Moon.
Nice.
And now me and Gilby Clarke from Guns N' Roses have got a band called Halloween Jack. And because I'm a drummer, I'm athletic, I need to play, so I'm always starting new bands. That's just how I do it. But thanks for having me. You know, find me anywhere you can, and I'll stick it to them for you.
Blink twice if there will be new Jane's Addiction music soon.
It's going to happen.
Sweet. So, Jacob, want to say goodbye to everybody?
Goodbye. I was here. I was here during the episode, guys. I was here. We have to have you on again, because I didn't even get to ask half the questions that I had for you. I'm also a big fan, in case you didn't know. I'm definitely, I grew up on 90s alt and Jane's Addiction, and I like getting drunk and breaking shit.
We'll have you back on. Definitely.
Well, you know, the best thing about 90s music after Jane's was the drummers. We had the Pumpkins with Jimmy. We had Dave Askew with Pearl Jam. We had Chamberlain with, of course, you know, Soundgarden. Primus. We had Tim. And there's a lot of great drummers, man. So, yeah, let's talk again. And you lead the conversation, Jake. You can lead that.
Hell yeah.
Well, if you would like to email us, you can email us at openmikerspodcast@gmail.com. We are at openmikers on Twitter and facebook.com/openmikerspodcast. And, of course, go to get a t-shirt, tpublic.com/openmikerspodcast. And we will see you guys next week.
Cool, that went good.
That was great. Thank you so much. This has been an absolute blast.
Yes, thank you so much for coming on.
Absolutely, man. Let's do part 2, because I did go quick, and definitely love talking about the music and the history of it.
And
oh yeah, man. We could probably do like 5 episodes if I run out of shit to talk about.
So we'll probably get kicked off by Zoom here in a minute, but we're still a new podcast, so we're still trying to get money so we can pay Zoom so we can do longer calls.
Well, you guys, good luck with it. You're good at what you do. You're great hosts, and let's do it again. We'll get Eileen to set it up, and I'm definitely there for you. I'm happy.
Thank you. And
absolutely,
man. Twitch, we'll see you guys. Be back in 20 minutes with Nerd Cave Retro.